Shoutouts this week to some new friends. First, a big thank you to Todd Cochran. He interviewed me on his podcast called Podcast Insider in late September. Another shout out to Paul Kondo. He's the editor of the newsletter Podcast Gumbo, and he featured the Shaping Opinion podcast in his newsletter. He made mention of our fireworks episode this year, and he highlighted our episode about Heinz Ketchup in 2018. And a big thank you to Matthew Plotner for having me on his podcast. His podcast is called Is It Philosophy? And that's where we talked about violence in the media. If you have any thoughts or feedback, send it to me through email at tim@shapingopinion.com. If it's easier for you, just get in touch on Twitter or Instagram @shapingopinion. If you want, we can give you a shout out. And as always, thank you for being a listener of the Shaping Opinion podcast. You're the reason we do this. This is Shaping Opinion, a production of O'Brien Communications. Can you remember the first election year when candidates started to converge on the Waveland Cafe?
I'm going to say it was in 1998. However, our big push happened in 2002 when Tom Brokaw did the nightly news from our store.
What did they do when they came to your store?
When the candidates come here, and we've had some years where CNN used this as their template, and we had 7 or 8 candidates all at once that were on air and getting asked questions going into a caucus or going into an election cycle. And because we've dealt with so many different entities as far as media, we're a very comfortable spot to come to because my staff works around them. So we've had good luck with that, and I'm assuming that's why we keep getting return visits.
I'm Tim O'Brien. In this episode of the Shaping Opinion podcast, we're joined by David Stone. He's the owner of the Waveland Cafe in Des Moines, Iowa. You may not know where it is, but you can be sure that those presidential campaigns going through Iowa during this presidential primary season do know where it is. The premise of our podcast is simple. We talk about people, events, and things that have shaped the way we think. Today we'll talk with David about what it's like every 4 years when your humble little diner becomes a popular campaign stop for anyone who wants to become President of the United States. On Monday, February 3rd, 2020, Iowa will conduct its caucuses to kick off the presidential election primary season, officially launching the 2020 presidential election campaign in America. Assuming that President Trump is the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party, all eyes are on the Democrat race and how the field of candidates will do in Iowa. At stake are 41 pledged delegates for the Democrat convention. The Iowa caucuses are a closed caucus, not an open election. Since Iowa is the first stop on the way to the 2020 presidential decision, no state has gotten more attention from the large field of Democrat candidates than Iowa, and in particular, its state capital of Des Moines. Situated on University Avenue just to the west of downtown Des Moines, just across the street from the Universal Barbershop, and half a block from the Ace Hardware store, is the Waveland Cafe. It's one of the more popular campaign stops for anyone seeking to earn those 41 delegates at the Democrat convention. David Stone is the owner.
Well, we're known for hash browns. I've got a 54-seat diner that is only open 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., and I'll go through 3 tons of hash browns a month, in addition to a whole lot of eggs and pancakes, etc. It's not unusual for my store to have people standing inside waiting to eat, as well as lying down the sidewalk waiting to get in.
That's a good problem to have, isn't it?
It is a good problem to have.
Now, how did you become the owner? How did Stoney become the owner of the Waveland Cafe?
Well, I've been in the hospitality industry since 1974, and at one time I had a bunch of delis, and a gentleman had opened this and had started the concept of the Waveland back in 84. I started looking at it in 1991. He was getting ready to sell, and in 92 is when I purchased the store. and kind of turned it into the type of cafe that I was used to going to with my father up in northern Wisconsin.
And what type of cafe was that? What kind of changes did you make to give it its atmosphere?
Well, I'm very fortunate. Most of my staff is still here since 1902 when I hired them. The floor today, I've got a cook in the kitchen since 91 and since 93. And I've got a waitress since 91, another waitress since 93, and a third waitress since 95. So I keep very good help around, and they all show up. Our food is consistent to a fault, and that's part of the reason that we are so busy. And we really don't have all the amenities that most restaurants have. Our signage isn't the greatest. We don't have enough parking. We just give great food and exceptional service, and that seems to be a good formula.
We know that political candidates come here, but are there any celebrities?
As far as celebrities, anyone from David Crosby to Jason Momoa is a very good customer of ours. Whenever he's in Des Moines, is at my store. Oh, goodness, the Unser Brothers. We get a lot of celebrities in, and a lot of presidential candidates have been in, as well as the vice president and Tom Vilsack, who's the Secretary of Agriculture. Terry Branstad, of course, now he's in China. He's the ambassador in China for the United States. And because of the makeup of my clientele, where you'll have everyone from politicians to students to retired people to families with their children, there's a pretty good cross-section for them to get opinions from all over the spectrum.
Well, there's something about certain restaurants that have well-known figures come into their restaurants, and people will say, well, why don't you name this after so-and-so, because that's what she always orders or he always orders. Has anyone ever asked you to name something on your menu after some of your more famous guests?
They have not, but I've taken the lead and done that myself. We have breakfast Momoa style, and he's a large eater, eats a lot of food.
Jason Momoa is the famous actor.
Correct. Well, he first was in Game of Thrones, I believe, but his most recent, he was on Aquaman, and he was the Aquaman in that movie. And he grew up just south of Des Moines in a town called Norwalk, but he's been coming to this store for 22 years and mentions us a lot on his websites and his Facebook page. And he'll call and say he asked to reserve the restaurant, and we don't do that, but we'll open up early for him, and he'll bring in 20 or 30 people.
Well, what I read about Jason was he ordered a full order of hash browns with a full order of biscuits and gravy, 3 sunny-side eggs up, a side of bacon, toast, and juices. Is that a normal breakfast for him?
That's a normal breakfast for him, and then he actually got finished with that here at about 10 o'clock, and he went to another store that he patronizes here, and it was a tasty taco store, and he had 6 of theirs tacos, and then after he left there, he went to another place, a burger place, and had a couple half-pound bacon cheeseburgers with onion rings, and then he flew to St. Louis, and he showed there was a picture of him at a bar, and he had a pitcher of Guinness beer and 2 plates of wings, and that was all within about a 7-hour span.
Wow.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, I don't think any political candidate could keep up with that. But we did want to talk to you about the political season, because it's that time of year, and it's at that time of every 4 years that the Waveland Cafe sort of finds its place in the spotlight. And you had mentioned that Tom Brokaw did a broadcast from there when he was working with NBC.
Correct.
Covering the election years ago. And you had also mentioned then that these other networks have come along since then. So it seems to be media-driven in the beginning. CNN, MSNBC, CBS.
Correct.
What is it about? And you had mentioned your staff is very good at working with them. Is that the primary reason that the media chooses the Waveland? Is it location? Or is it even the optics of having the Waveland in the background when they do their live shots?
I would say more the optic, because my location is certainly not a convenient thing. It's maybe the oldest strip mall in the city. It was built in the 1920s. I occupy right at 2,000 square feet of it, so I've got a couple storefronts. And most anybody, like if you come to Des Moines and you say, where do you go eat breakfast? And 9 out of 10 times, if not 10 out of 10, it will come up Waveland Cafe. And so I think the optics, the fact that I've painfully kept it like an old school diner. My kitchen yells out food Judge Judy style to my waitresses. They will drop whatever they're doing, and food gets to you extremely hot and fast. We've got a pretty good system that can turn a lot of tables.
So they're basically satisfied customers with great optics. That's the recipe for the media. Who were some of the other hosts outside of Tom Brokaw who have come to the Waveland, the people from CNN and MSNBC and CBS that have been through there?
Well, Soledad O'Brien, she started her morning show from the Waveland. I believe that was in 2011. I could be off on that. It was called Getting Started, and it was she was here for 3 days, and they launched a program for her. So that's probably, other than we've had C-SPAN in the store, CNN has broadcast from here 3 caucuses out of the last, probably since 2008. She's had 3 different times they've come and parked their semi next door, and we're broadcasting live from the Waveland.
Well, let's go behind the scenes then. Now, when they're on camera, we know what it looks like. Do the people that are on camera typically take the time to eat at the Waveland, or do they do it more for the cameras?
No, they absolutely eat. As a matter of fact, the last people that were here, which was just within the last month, was the Stephen Colbert group, and it wasn't Stephen Colbert himself, but it was the celebrities or the people that put the show on, and they filmed here for about 2 hours, a little over 2 hours. And here's what they wrote to me. It said, "Stoney, thank you so much for allowing us to film at the Waveland Cafe. You and your staff were absolutely accommodating and flexible, not to mention the food was so good. We came back on Saturday morning and said, please feel free to accept our appreciation with some items that we've sent you in the box." And they sent us some T-shirts and coffee cups, etc.
That's really a compliment when they come back. They come back a second time. That's for real. What about the candidates themselves? Are they loyal customers too?
They are. Almost all the candidates have eaten when they were here, either prior to the interview or when the interview was open, and they'd stay around to eat breakfast. And part of that could be because we have been judged best breakfast in Des Moines for the past 22 years. And then recently, Delish Magazine named us the best breakfast place in the state. And the Iowa Egg Council awarded us best omelet in the state. And that was within the last 3-4 months.
Now, how does this affect your customer traffic? When the caucus season is about to start, do you see an increase or a decrease in your regular customer traffic?
Kind of a double-edged sword. We'll see. A lot of people will come in to find out if we know who's coming and when they're coming. When there are candidates here, my audience tends to stay around, so we're not turning tables so fast because they want to see the show, so to speak. Some of them will avoid us because of, cameras or media trucks, but it resonates pretty well with everybody that has been coming to here. We have a very loyal clientele, and so it's become part of the footprint of Waveland.
Well, now, and as the season starts to approach, do you do anything different with the diner or the parking lot or even the menu?
No, one year we did a thing with C-SPAN, and we kind of partnered with a diner in New Hampshire, and we had pancakes, and if you chose a pancake with red, that was the party that had strawberries in it, that was the party you were following, and if you chose one with blueberries, then that was the party you were going with. And we did as much tracking of those sales as we could to see who, between New Hampshire and ourselves, which way it was leaning. And that's, let me see, I've got one of those coffee cups if I can tell you what year that was. I'm going to say that might have been 2008, could have been 2012.
Well, that was a pivotal year, 2008. So which party won according to your blueberry-strawberry vote?
The blueberry one.
So that was consistent with the actual election results for that year.
Correct.
That would be a good way to poll then in this election season, wouldn't it? If you were to do that again, we might have an idea of how next year might turn out.
I wouldn't guarantee it's a science, but it certainly could poll that way.
You had mentioned that the diners, it's a double-edged sword, and there's a term that I've heard called Iowa nice, and it's a very polite way that people from Iowa behave. How are the diners when the candidates come in? Is there a certain etiquette that they follow?
No, not so much. Oh my goodness, we've had people that, I've had my waitresses come in and work in, once we gave them pajamas and bathrobes that matched, and they decided they'd all wait tables that day. And so if that gives you an idea how accommodating it is, my staff knows everybody that comes in here because, frankly, I can't get rid of my staff. They stick around forever, and that's another nice problem to have. And because of that, everybody feels comfortable. Most of my girls know the families that come in, what their children are doing. They track how they're progressing in school. And so everybody feels as though they're sitting in their home and a candidate has come to their living room. And celebrities as well as candidates have always been very gracious in not only talking. Certainly candidates want to get perspectives on things, but they also will sign autographs. They will take pictures. I've gone into the kitchen and taken pictures with my kitchen crew cooking and stood outside in front of the signage and taken pictures. And so it's a very comfortable setting, and I think that's the reason people are drawn to it. I don't think there's any social expectation or dress expectation, or it's just a matter of coming in and having a good time. We have a little saying that you'd be hard-pressed to come into the Waveland Cafe and not leave with a better outlook on your day than when you got here. That's been our motto, service is all you have to sell. We happen to have a great product, and we're consistent to a fault.
To me, there's nothing like the atmosphere of a diner, especially a good diner in a place like Des Moines. And when I think about a diner, I guess, and I use the word flavor in both ways here, pun intended, I guess, because you get a flavor of the local community when you go to a diner, not just the food, but the people. And one of the things I do, I'm in the public relations business, one of the things I often do will be to tell a client or myself, when you're looking at a town or an area, is to go in and to a place like a diner and get a feel for what that area is like and what's on people's minds, and speak to a stranger and find out what they're thinking. And that's what the candidates are doing when they come to the Waveland. You will see a candidate shaking hands. So my question for you, based on your observations, is, are these candidates actually listening? And do you think they're learning from some of your customers?
Oh, absolutely. I have no doubt about that. Because they are so genuine, and I believe that might be part of what you were talking about, the Iowa nice or Iowa makeup. We've never had confrontations. It is people, Iowa is pretty serious about their status as first in the nation, as well as because of that, we see a lot of candidates that, if we were just running down the road and it wasn't the beginning of it, we might not have that. But the political climate around caucus time, and obviously this year leading up to this election, has been very strong. We haven't had as many candidates in yet. We had Steve Bullock from Montana, and then there's the governor from Colorado is coming in today. Someone called and said that they were going to be in around 9:30 this morning. So it's just starting to get into that cycle where we're going to see a lot of traffic.
What do you think they're learning from your diners about the country or about what's important to the voters?
Well, I think it's a double-edged sword. I think my clientele is learning about them because they want to. There's so many people in the Democratic field that there's a lot of sifting being done on who's going to end up getting who's going to be on the platform down the road as they get into this season, and so they listen to see what the concerns are because. Des Moines, I draw people from all over the state, and so there can be people in here from a 600-person town versus Des Moines. And they all they're knowledge hungry. They want to see what candidates have to bring to the table. And as a result, when you're trying to sway voters or trying to get them to listen to your message, they're very, very focused on who is talking to them and certainly are trying to get their views across so that they can help their position in the candidacy that's going on.
Well, you're behind the counter, and I know that when the crowd leaves, when the media people leave, and when the politicians leave, and you're there with your own customers, does that spur an increase in political talk at the counter during this time of year?
Definitely. You will see people talking with each other about what they heard and what they didn't hear. We don't get at least not so far this year, we haven't had as many come in at the same time, whereas before there might be, 2008 we had 6 candidates here at the same time. They were all being interviewed on TV, and then it went out to the public. And so at the time when one person was interviewing, the other candidates were walking around and talking with my clientele.
When your clientele are talking about politics, are there any particular issues this year that seem to be on their minds, healthcare, jobs, anything like that?
Certainly. Healthcare is probably right up there. There's a lot of talk because we're a fairly, a huge agricultural state of the condition of the economics for Iowa. It is certainly, I don't usually get political too much, but the tariffs have put a horrible strain on the economy in Iowa, and now that the president has taken away the mandates for ethanol at 80-some refineries, there's already been 2 ethanol plants that have gone out of business or have filed bankruptcy, and there's a lot of farmers that aren't going to be able to secure loans and secure things to be able to farm. So there's a big concern with that, certainly.
The caucuses are scheduled for February. Do the Iowans like the caucus approach, or do you think they would prefer a more general election?
I think it may be starting to sway a little bit. There was a recent article where some people were talking about how Iowa might be trying to get more into a primary versus a caucusing mode. However, it certainly brings people to discussion because they all get into groups and start backing a candidate. But it seems like that might be changing a little, and that could be because of the younger people that have, Des Moines has had pretty good growth spurt in the past 4 or 5 years, and there's a lot of new younger workforce that have come into the insurance industry and banking industry and et cetera.
The February 3rd caucus is the first one of the year, so that has 2 dimensions to it. One is Iowa gets all of the attention up front by the most candidates because you are first, but it's also done sooner. So what's the atmosphere like when the caucuses are over in February?
Well, I'd say the atmosphere, usually let's say the top 3 candidates that come out of the caucuses that are on the top tier have gained a little momentum because they're in the news and they're being talked about because of what happened in Iowa. And that certainly gets people talking about what direction and what they think is going to happen. And certainly right after the caucuses, people come in here and say, did you see anyone and who was at your store and what did you think of? They may identify a candidate, and most of the time we'll see them, although we saw a shift of that also happening in the last, probably the last 6 years. We used to get more candidates more frequently, But now they want to begin on the social stage because they can hit so many more people as far as being out in social media. And so for 6 years ago, they had just down the street from us is Drake University, and there were 10 candidates there at the time. And the television affiliates here had told all of them, oh, you need to get to the Waveland, you need to get to the Waveland. This is where everybody goes. And they were less than a mile and a half on the same street from us. And it was a live thing at Drake University with these 10 candidates, and we didn't see a one of them. And they all beat feet and went to the next place where they were going to have more of a presence that was being filmed with mediators or people asking questions instead of the stopping into a 50-seat diner. And I don't know if that was because of the climate 6 years ago and it seemed to have followed through 2 years ago. This year we've already had a couple candidates, and I would expect that to continue because of it's kind of a contentious situation from what my clientele tells me.
Well, those campaigns that don't stop by the Waveland, what are they missing?
Well, I think the thing that, of course, this is my opinion, I think the people who haven't been here in a candidate or a media profession or that haven't seen this type of a store, how people want to talk to people and they want their opinions to get out. And there's such a diverse clientele here. There is I'll read you just a little quote. It says, "When I go to the Waveland, I always hope that nobody I know sees me eating there. All my favorite kind of people eat there. Thinking people, hardworking people, accepting, non-judgmental people. And there they are right along with me, happily stuffing their same fitness-spoiling fare into their mouths. And while we eat, we dig the entertainment. The servers are a hoot straight out of Central Casting." And when you take that into context with the people that are here as well as the candidates that are coming here, it's such a diverse clientele. There's no political side to this store. My waitresses and cooks all have their own opinions, but I don't put anything out front of where the Waveland is leaning or not, because it's just an accepting place for people to have conversation. And conversation is, you'll find very few people sitting on a cell phone in my restaurant, because that's not what they want to do. Most of them won't bring in a computer or a tablet, partially because my girl, we move fast and they might get something spilled on it. Not by design, of course. So I think that those candidates that don't get here are missing a true opportunity of such a cross-section from agricultural to insurance executives to banking supervisors to small businessmen. And because I'm an independent, I have a lot of independent business owners that patronize me, as we patronize them also. And that is that's kind of the flavor of Iowa. And everyone from coaches to musicians to celebrities, they all get along. It's just a comfortable setting.
David Stone, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
To learn more about the Waveland Cafe and the upcoming Iowa caucuses, please see our show notes at shapingopinion.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please let people know by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. You can subscribe to the Shaping Opinion podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. On Twitter, just tweet to us at Shaping Opinion, or you can get in touch with us through our website, shapingopinion.com. We have a Facebook page, and we're on Instagram at Shaping Opinion. Shaping Opinion is a production of O'Brien Communications. This is where we talk about people, events, and things that have shaped the way we think. Until next time, I'm Tim O'Brien.